Hello everyone, my name is Marteen van Aalst. I'm director of the Red Cross Crescent Climate Center. And I'm glad to address you by video today, even though I'm sorry I cannot be with you in person. What I'll do the coming 5 minutes or so is share with you some of the key messages from a recent report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which summarizes the best scientific knowledge on climate-related issues, and then summarizes the key points of that scientific knowledge for policymakers. Those conclusions get signed off by all governments so that we have a real scientific consensus that is the basis for further climate policy making. The IPCC recently released this report specifically on the topic of climate, extremes and disasters. And that's a topic that, reading your national and regional reports, is particularly pertinent to this meeting as well. So I'll take you through some of the key messages and then reflect a bit on what those might mean for your discussions these 2 days. First of all, the report concludes that the risk of disasters is rising around the world. Now, that's not to say that that risk is rising primarily or even entirely due to climate change. We know actually for certain that most of the rise that we've seen so far is due to an increase in exposure and possibly changes in vulnerability in individual locations. The most important reason for the overall rise in disaster losses is the increasing number of people and increasing economic assets at risk. Now, clearly, coming together with an increase in extreme weather events that may be related to climate change, there is an especial reason for concern. And indeed, we know that in some places, climate change has already changed the nature of some extremes. We have seen an increase in the occurrence of extreme warm days and heat waves, and we've also seen changes in patterns of heavy precipitation and extreme sea level events, for instance. And looking into the future, we are quite certain that quite a few of those trends are bound to continue. We're more certain about some extremes than we are about others. So for instance, that trend that I mentioned before on extreme heat and heat waves is quite certain to continue. We're quite sure about heavy precipitation increasing in quite a few places, but the level of certainty depends from place to place. We are actually even less certain than we were a few years ago about the tropical cyclones like Hurricane Katrina that made the news a few years ago. So there are also areas where we've clearly got more to learn. One important message of this report is also that while we are very certain about the overall increase in risk, and we're certain about some extremes increasing significantly, overall climate change is also bringing more uncertainties. So for some risks, we may not be able to quantify as surely as in the past what exactly we should be planning for. And that requires dealing with uncertainty even more so than we had to before in disaster risk management. So the report concludes that a new balance needs to be struck between, on the one hand, like unfortunately has happened too frequently in the past, us just waiting for disasters to happen and then cleaning up after the fact through disaster response by organizations like the Red Cross, and then eventually reconstruction of houses, infrastructure, and all the economic assets that have been lost in a disaster, towards more emphasis on risk reduction, on transferring risk through insurance, for instance, but also much more effective emergency preparedness, and that includes prominently things like early warning systems. So the report concludes very prominently that existing risk management measures needs to be improved, and that includes early warning systems, land use planning, development and enforcement of building codes, improvements to health surveillance, ecosystems management and restoration, just to mention a few. A lot of those measures are not new in light of climate change. They just need to be employed at a larger scale, and their priority is raised in that light of that changing risk, including those changing, rising uncertainties. And the capacity to do that depends on the capacity of systems to operate effectively. Systems to integrate the knowledge that we have about how things are changing in particular locations, but also the ability of systems to work together in that whole spectrum of solutions for risk management, ranging from anticipating future risk, trying to reduce that future risk, anticipating when something is going to happen in the shorter term through early warning, emergency preparedness, and then effective response once the disaster happens, and then building back better after something has happened so that future risk is lower than it was before, instead of just reconstructing the risk that existed in the past. And that capacity, and that's another important conclusion of the report, depends not just on national governments or on one individual actor like the Red Cross, It depends on a system of actors working together: national governments, subnational governments, the private sector, research bodies, meteorological agencies providing knowledge, but needing better bridges to the end users of that information to make it more effective, and very importantly, civil society organizations, including all the way down to the community level. And I think that, in conclusion, is very much in sync with the process that you've embarked upon here in these meetings and in the process that you've been through already. It's extremely exciting to see around the table in your meeting today government representatives as well as a range of civil society partners thinking together about their adaptation strategies. Once again, you're already following the newest conclusions of this latest IPCC report. And from the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center's perspective, we are very eager to learn about what you've been concluding so far, what you'll be concluding these 2 days, and not just in terms of the individual measures or approaches or strategies that you'd want to put in place in your individual countries or as a region, but also in terms of the process that you've established of working together in a partnership. Once again, we'll be connecting to several of you, and once again, we applaud your efforts. If you have any questions for me about this IPCC report or about anything else in this meeting, there are several people, including Sonia and Louisa, who know how to connect to me even during these 2 days. It's been a pleasure being able to address you at a distance. I wish you all the best during these 2 days. And once again, I look forward to hearing about your conclusions. Thank you very much.